G'day model builders. This build fought me in all the small ways. Panel lines that didn't quite line up, decals that melted, slats that needed more work than expected, and a paint experiment that very nearly went sideways. But somehow, every mistake turned into a detail I wouldn't change. Today, I want to take you through what I learned, the wins, the frustrations, and the surprises that made this one of my favourite builds yet. I'll show you how it's done. The kit is Academy's 1/72nd scale F-86E from the Gabreski double boxing, but I finished this one in the markings of Lonnie Moore's aircraft Billie, using a mix of kit decals and a microscale sheet. It's a late 1990s tooling, solid overall, good proportions, but very much a kit that expects you to do a bit of the work yourself. Nothing here is difficult, but almost every step asks for a little patience. The cockpit is actually one of the stronger parts of this kit, especially for its age. I didn't feel the need to replace anything. The moulded detail is all there, so the focus here was on paint and restraint. I started with a dark base coat and slowly brought the detail back with lighter tones, dry brushing just enough to catch the raised edges without flattening everything. At this scale, contrast does more work than accuracy, so I kept checking the cockpit under different light to make sure it still read clearly. I added my own 3D printed seat belts, trimmed down to fit the Sabre seat properly. They're subtle, but once they're in place, they immediately change how the cockpit feels. It stops looking like a kit part and starts looking occupied. The yellow ejection handles were bent from thin tin wire. They're tiny, fiddly, and absolutely worth it. One of those details your eye goes straight to once the canopy's on. Nothing dramatic here, just careful paint, small additions, and knowing when to leave things alone. This is where the kit reminded me very clearly that it dates from the 1990s. The centerline seam needed real persuasion. Not just a quick sand, but filling. Checking, sanding again. And then carefully restoring the panel lines that ran straight through it. The wing join was similar. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't the kind of fit you can just glue and forget about either. I ended up rescribing more panel lines on this build than I expected, especially along the fuselage spine and wing roots. Rescribing a 1/72nd scale jet is one of those jobs that's never technically difficult, but it demands focus. One slip and you're fixing mistakes instead of making progress. It's also one of those moments where you slow down, put some music on, and accept that it's just part of getting the finish you want. In the end, the panel lines came out clean and consistent, and honestly, this model is better for it. It takes time, but it's time well spent. The landing gear bays are where I really let myself get carried away. Academy gives you a reasonable starting point, but in some areas, especially the nose gear bay, there's room for more. And once you notice that, it's hard not to start adding things. I added a small manifold on the rear bulkhead and a sight glass cover that will end up being painted red. I began by adding hydraulic lines to the ceiling and along the left-hand side wall using fine wire and stretched sprue. A tiny detail, but one that adds a surprising amount of visual interest. Each line and component gives the eye something new to discover, even at this scale. The big addition here is the scissor mechanism for the door uplock, mounted against the right-hand wall. It's quite prominent on the real aircraft, and once it's in place, the whole bay suddenly makes sense. None of this is complex on its own, but it's the layering that matters. Once everything was painted, I picked out the hydraulic lines in black and metallic tones, painted the sight glass cover red, and then tied it all together with a brown wash. It's one of those areas most people will only glance at, but for me, it became one of the highlights of the build. A defining feature of the F-86E is its automatic leading edge slats. They're a big part of the Sabre's look, especially when they're extended on the ground. The kit includes them, and they fit reasonably well, but the detail inside the recess is non-existent. When the slats are extended, that recess structure and some of the mechanism is clearly visible. So I decided to put that recent scribing practice to use and add the detail myself. This meant carefully laying out the panel structure, working slowly and constantly checking that I was achieving what I was intending. It's a small change, but it completely transformed how the wings look once the slats are in place. It's also one of those jobs that takes far longer than you expect, but pays off immediately in the final result. If you're building an E-model Sabre, it's absolutely worth the effort. Painting was where things got interesting. I wanted to try something new on this build, a hand-brushed natural metal finish using dry brushing. The idea was to start with a matte black primer to give the surface some tooth, and then build the metal finish gradually with several shades of aluminium. I'd seen this technique done very convincingly on larger scale models and was curious to see how it would translate to 1/72nd scale. The answer was not very well. The grain effect I was trying to achieve ended up far too coarse for the scale. Up close it looked interesting, but once big sections of the airframe were covered, it just didn't read correctly. At that point, I had a choice. Push on and hope it worked out, or stop and rethink the approach. I decided to pivot. I went back to a more traditional brush painting method, but with careful variation across the airframe. Brighter aluminium tones for the formed leading edges where the grain runs along the panel. Slightly darker shades for machined wing boxes. And a more matte, brighter finish for the control surfaces where the grain runs across the panels. If there's a hint of texture showing through underneath, well, let's just say it adds character. Not every experiment works, but this one still taught me a lot. The stainless steel area around the tailpipe was done in a darker metallic mix, and I used the same tone around the gun ports. While working on the metallics, something about the forward gun panel didn't sit right with me. The colour was fine, but visually it felt too plain, like something was missing. After checking references, it became obvious that a panel line was missing at the forward edge. I scribed that line in very lightly and immediately fixed the whole area. It's a tiny change, but it breaks up the surface just enough to make the panelling read correctly. This is one of those moments where a reference photo really earns its keep. Decals went smoothly, right up until they didn't. I was using a mix of microscale decals and the kit sheet, and everything was settling down beautifully. But I got a bit too enthusiastic with the Mr. Hobby Softer. Parts of the yellow and black ID stripes softened far more than I expected, and in a few spots they actually melted. To make matters worse, the stress from the decal solution caused the trailing edge seam on the right wing to pop. That's always a fun moment, when chemistry undoes your structural work. I had to reglue the seam, clean everything up, and then retouch the yellow by hand. Matching yellow paint is never easy, especially over metallics, so I was relying heavily on weathering to help blend everything together. It's not perfect, but it's convincing, and sometimes that's enough. Just when I thought the decals were finished, I realised that Moore's aircraft carried an extra set of yellow and black ID stripes on the tail. There was no way around it. They had to be painted. I masked the entire stripe area, laid down a white undercoat, followed by yellow, then masked again for the black. By the time everything was unmasked, the paint build-up along the edges was a little heavier than I'd planned, and some of the white was still visible. This is where incoherent swearing and weathering products come to the rescue. A bit of blending and shading, and the problem quietly disappeared. Except that I just told you all about it. The clear parts on this kit are unusual. All the frame detail is moulded on the inside, leaving the exterior completely smooth. Visually it looks great, but it does make painting a bit more involved. I painted the interior frame colour first, which was fiddly but manageable. The canopy went without much drama, but the windscreen fought me the whole way. I made the mistake of trying to completely cover the interior black with the exterior metallic colour, which left the frames far too wide. I installed the windscreen anyway, partly because it needed filling and blending, and partly because I needed time to think. That delay turned into a happy accident. While I was doing this, the acrylic metallic paint had a chance to fully cure. The cleanup was far sharper and more precise than anything I could have achieved if I had done it earlier. The end result was exactly what I was aiming for. This time by accident, but next time I do it, it'll be by experience. Final weathering was deliberately restrained. These aircraft were kept relatively clean. Every bit of extra speed and performance mattered. I used a grey wash overall to settle into the panel lines, and a brown wash concentrated in the slat recesses and some of the deeper areas. Control surfaces and flaps got an extra pass along the panel line to help them stand out. Stains and dirt were added sparingly, following the airflow or gravity as appropriate. The wheel wells and speed brakes were finished by picking out the hydraulic lines and details once more, then tying everything together with a final brown wash. Sometimes less really is more. And here she is, Lonnie Moore's Billie, in 1/72nd scale. The slats, the metal finish, the nose gear bay, the subtle weathering all came together in the end. This build pushed me in a lot of small ways, but it taught me a few new things, and that's what keeps me coming back to the bench. Thanks for watching, and if you've made it this far and have enjoyed it, please hit that subscribe button. There's more on the way.